Hello, I'm the artist Michael Zotos, and today is June 20th, 2023. What I want to talk about right now is a philosophical work that I came up with a very long time ago. It took me a lot of years to actually come up with it, get it all written out, perfected, and then I sent it into the U.S. Copyright Office and received a copyright on it, and then I had it self-published, and a lot of copies. It cost me money, and then I went out to get feedback on it, and I found that people were not really able to read it. So I really had nothing, at least nothing for the moment. Some people told me this is great for posterity. Well, anyway, I revised it. I turned it into basically two pamphlets. One pamphlet is some of the philosophical concepts simplified, greatly simplified. And that was a good move. The other pamphlet is how I achieved, like the process I went through to achieve these realizations, I call them. So what I'm going to do right now is read to you just a few pages of the first pamphlet. It's called The Growth and Development of the Emotional Entity by Michael R. Zotos. And I'm not going to read the beginning preliminaries, the introduction, and who thought what of the book and all. I'm just going to go right into what I call the emotional formulas, starting at page 1. Okay? The basic concept of the growth and development is best described in the 10 ideas below. Number 1, if we look at the emotional part of a person as an actual entity on its own, with its own elements and faculties, we see more clearly how it functions. Number 2, isolating the emotional part of the self as its own entity, we may then identify it as the emotional entity. Well, that's very simple. Number 3, the emotional entity exists in the present moment with an offshoot into the future moment and is constantly anticipating the stabilization of that offshoot. Okay, we could follow that thought easily enough. Whether it is a brief offshoot into a limited concept of the future or a broader concept of what the future holds. Number 4, we may refer to the momentary offshoot of the emotional entity into the future as the growth of the emotional entity, and that's just for lack of a better term. And we may refer to the stabilization of that offshoot as the development of the entity. A little bit of a different dynamic than the growth. So it's the growth and the development. Number 5, the emotional entity does not necessarily grow or develop at any time or over time. It is always in a fluid state of the growth and development. In other words, a momentary state. Number 6, in the growth and development, the momentary offshoot into the future and the stabilization of the offshoot, the future moment is anticipated but can never be absolutely certain. This is the preemption to an emotional state. Okay, now it took a lot to get that the whole philosophical work down to this little bit of information in a readable form. Number 7, the emotional entity is functional. At any moment, it combines what is tangible, and this is important. This is the gist of it. The emotional entity is functional. At any moment, it combines what is tangible, that can be seen, heard, or otherwise noticed through the senses, with what is not tangible, like a thought, idea, opinion, belief, or an experience. Now, I believe that is a very valid statement, and it's actually taking what is tangible, that's in technically the outside world, with what is not tangible, thought, idea, opinion, belief, or an experience. These are within the self. The combination and how it works together is what actually generates an emotional state or an attitude, but that's for another day. Okay. Number 8, we may refer to the combination of tangibles with intangibles within the emotional entity as stabilizations of reality, or just as stabilizations. Now, I need to say here and now, stabilizations was a term I came up with in order to solidify in my mind. Remember, this was all thoughts being generated all at once sometimes, and you have to try to ground them and pinpoint them. So I came up with the word stabilizations to identify and solidify in my mind this combination that was going on of the tangibles, which are hardcore facts, with intangibles, which are not. Much like, you know, on a computer there is the hardware, more tangible, and the software and the result, which is not tangible. Okay, so I'll read that again. Number 8, we may refer to the combination of tangibles with intangibles within the emotional entity as stabilizations of reality, or just as stabilizations. Number 9, and I guess I bolded this, so I guess it's going to be significant to me. Number 9, it is through the momentary stabilizations and their relationship with fluid states of the growth and development that the emotional entity transforms into an emotional state. Okay, what I'm saying there is that the emotional self actually becomes an emotional state. Number 10, any emotion may be defined, identified, or created as an assessment of the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity. Below are examples. And now we're going to go into something that's kind of fun, okay? And it's not that long. All right. Happiness. This is examples of emotional states. Happiness. There's a great gain in the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity. Sadness. There is a great loss in the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity. Inspiration. There are great gains of in the stabilization of the growth and development of the emotional entity, which are suddenly visible and attainable. Now remember, this is an assessment, okay? It's not factual. So I'm going to read that one again. Inspiration. There are great gains in the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity, which are suddenly visible and attainable. Now, I also want to point out, you know, this is a little bit out there, and it's a little bit deep, but it's not that deep. And what you're actually, the result, what you're getting out of it is good, it's valid, I believe, and for the little bit that it takes to follow, it's well worth it, okay, in the long run. Confidence. The stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are strong and constant. Well, that's very easy to see. Anger. There is a constriction of, and I underline the word important, stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity that is not necessary to be. So you get angry. You become angry. Aggravation. There is a constriction of the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity with no end to that constriction in sight. Okay. Worry. The stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are in possible danger. We're almost done. We have 3 more. Okay. Despair. The stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are rapidly depleting. Fear. The stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are in definite and absolute danger. Okay. Obviously, we can understand. You're afraid sometimes for your life or for your finances or whatever it is. And I'm reducing it to a simple, the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are in definite and absolute danger. I'm categorizing whatever that may be as stabilizations of the growth and development, which is the offshoot of the emotional self into the future and the stabilization of that offshoot. Okay, 2 more. Hope. Certain new stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity are needed, and it would appear that they may be forthcoming. And then peacefulness, which I like. Okay, the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity have had and continue to have a lack of conflict. A lack of conflict. Okay, so that's done. Those are what I call the emotional formulas. And that is really the heart and the gist of the entire work, okay, in one sense. There are other gists in the book, but okay. While virtually anything focused on may be a vehicle to reach an emotional state, the emotional state itself is always an assessment of the state of the stabilizations of the growth and development of the emotional entity. Truthfully, that says a lot. As simple as, my trick here was to reduce this to simplicity, okay? One man I know well read this and he said, you know, you figured out how to create emotions. And I believe that's true. Okay, now there's another section. This is a page and a half. It's not that long, and I think it's well worth hearing. Illustration. This is an illustration of the use of the formulas. One home decorating technique is to use colors identical to those of enjoyable foods in order to create a pleasant atmosphere in the home. Okay? So a man redecorates, painting his walls banana yellow, his trim and baseboards caramel brown, and he installs cream-colored carpeting. A woman visits and sees the decor. Her emotional self combines what she sees, the tangible, with her past experiences and feelings about those experiences. Intangibles such as the time her father bought her a banana split ice cream or having had cream and bananas with friends, and it transforms. There would be a great gain in the stabilizations of the growth and development of her emotional entity, and she would be in the state of happiness. On the other hand, if the man had installed blackened hardwood paneling throughout his house, had filthy mud-stained carpeting, and used his kitchen as a smokehouse to cure pork for a week, then this visitor's emotional entity would become something different. Her emotional entity would combine what she sees and smells, tangible, with her past experiences and feelings, such as having been inside a dark and dirty barn, and would transform. The stabilizations of the growth and development of her emotional entity would be depleting as she stands there, and she would be in a state of despair. Well, that's obviously true. It's deep, it's simple, and now that it's out there, you know, it's reality. Alternatively, and we're just about completely finished here. If the same man with the blackened paneling, dirty carpeting, and the smell of a smokehouse throughout were visited by a hungry laborer who just worked in his yard, let's say, for 4 or 5 hours, okay, then as the laborer walked into the house, his emotional entity would transform, but would become something quite different. Excuse me. It would combine what the laborer sees and smells, tangibles, with his thoughts and beliefs, intangibles, such as the likelihood that he is about to get some smoked sausages to eat, and suddenly great gains in the stabilizations of the growth and development of his emotional entity would be visible and attainable. His emotional entity would be in the state of inspiration, and he would be inspired. So we see that the emotional formula works, and works the same way for the emotional entity within each person, although we enter a given situation with our own frame of reference, experiences, and desires. Okay, I do want to point out something. You know, I'm not really sure if the emotional formulas can be used to actually create emotional states. But I do know they can be used to enhance or enlarge emotional states, because I've done it, and many times. Now, very often people believe that if they can do something, so can anybody else, and yet when I used the emotional formulas, I knew that I was doing that, and I knew that I was doing something the other people couldn't do because they didn't have the formulas.